Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today, I'm going to be covering this book, The Falcon Thief. The cover then says, "A true tale of adventure, treachery, and the hunt for the perfect bird." Written by Joshua Hammer. This is that jacket art once again. The jacket image is by Albatross Lamy Stock Photo. Jacket design by Allison Forner. There's nothing in the praise section that I recognize by name or by reputation. I picked this book up because I am, like always, a fan of natural history books, and especially ones with a very focused narrative. So, thinking The Beast in the Garden, which was about a wildlife, I forget, it wasn't a wildlife manager, I think it was a person who worked within the Boulder, Colorado's Parks Department and ended up dealing with mountain lions becoming a problem in the 90s. And then there was, Heart of a Lion, where a mountain lion crossed most of the continental United States to end up dying in, I think, Connecticut or Rhode Island. And, American Buffalo is there. There's a lot of those focused narrative books in here. The book that I read and ranted about a few months ago about the Champawat tiger, that's another one where it's very specific on a specific animal. This one isn't about a specific animal, but rather a specific person. And more to the point, it's about two specific people. And those two specific people are Jeff Lendrum, who was a prolific bird of prey egg thief, and Andy McWilliam, a detective of the United Kingdom's National Wildlife Crime Unit, who ended up being the person that brought in Lendrum for, I don't want to say for good, but when he was caught for the big one. And this book really gets into the nitty gritty of Jeffrey Lendrum's life and McWilliam's career and how they eventually ended up colliding. But it starts with a story. The chapter one specifically is only 6 pages long, and it discusses the point, the moment in which Jeffrey Lendrum was caught. And I'll read the narrative because this first chapter is really good at spinning a narrative together and spinning it almost like it's gonna trap you. And that's how I felt about this book when I read this. The man had been in there far too long, John Straczynski thought. 20 minutes had elapsed since he had entered the shower facility in the Emirates Lounge for business and first-class passengers at Birmingham International Airport in the West Midlands region of England, 113 miles north of London. Now, Straczynski stood in the corridor outside the shower room, a stack of fresh towels in the cart beside him, a mop, a pail, and a pair of caution wet floor signs at his feet. The janitor was impatient to clean the place. The man and a female companion had been the first ones that day to enter the lounge, a warmly decorated room with butterscotch armchairs, a powder blue carpet, dark wood columns, glass coffee tables, and black shaded Chinese porcelain lamps. It was Monday, May 3rd, 2010, a bank holiday in the United Kingdom, and the lounge had opened at noon to accommodate passengers booked on the 2:40 p.m. Emirates direct flight to Dubai. The couple had settled into an alcove with a television near the reception desk. Minutes later, the man had stood up and headed for the shower carrying a shoulder bag and 2 small suitcases. That had struck Straczynski as strange. Who brings all of his luggage into the business and first class shower room? and now he had been in there 2 or 3 times longer than any normal passenger. A tall, lean man in his 40s with short cropped graying hair and brush mustache, Straczynski had spent a decade monitoring 130 closed-circuit television cameras on the night shift at a Birmingham shopping mall, a job that gave me a background in watching people, he would later say. That February, after a security firm laid him off, a management company had hired him to clean the Emirates Lounge. The first week he was there, the contractor enrolled him in an on-site training course to identify potential terrorist threats. The course, he would later say, heightened his normal state of suspicion. As Straczynski puttered around the hallway, the shower room door opened, and the passenger, a balding, slender, middle-aged white man of average height, stepped out. He slipped past Straczynski without looking at him. The cleaner opened the shower facility door and looked around the room. My goodness, he thought, what do we have here? The shower floor and glass partition surrounding it were both bone dry. All the towels remained stacked and neatly folded. The toilet for the disabled hadn't been used. The wash basin didn't have a drop of water in it. Though the man had been inside the room for 20 minutes, he didn't appear to have touched anything. Straczynski recalled his terrorism workshop that he had taken 3 months earlier, the exhortations from the instructor to watch out for odd looks and unusual behavior. This passenger was up to something. He knew it. Not sure what he was looking for, he rifled through the towels and face cloths, rummaged beneath the complimentary toothpaste tubes and other toiletries, checked the rubbish bin. He mounted a footstool and dislodged 2 ceiling tiles, wedging his hand into the hollow space just above them. Nothing. He shifted his attention to the baby-changing area. In the corner of the alcove stood a plastic, waist-high diaper bin with a round, flip lid. Straczynski removed the top and looked inside. He noticed something sitting on the bottom, a green cardboard egg carton. In one of the middle slots sat a single egg, dyed blood red. He stared at it, touched it gently. What could it mean? He recalled the recent arrest at Heathrow Airport outside London of a man trying to smuggle rare Indian box turtles in egg cartons, but that seemed so odd. More likely than not, this passenger was moving narcotics, like the gangsters in Liverpool who wedged packets of heroin and cocaine inside plastic Kinder Egg containers. That's it, he thought. It must have something to do with drugs. And as it goes on, what it describes is that this Straczynski fellow thought something was really strange and he reported it, and then the security at the airport reported it up higher to the police, and then the police knew that what they were looking at was something big, and so they called a specialist, McWilliams, and when he was given the description of what he saw there, the eggs, the colors of the various eggs, the size and shape of them, he knew these are peregrine falcon eggs. And so he rushes, speeding to get to that airport, and he ends up with the biggest arrest of his career, which is Jeffrey Landrum, the most prolific falcon egg thief in the world. And it goes into this really cool description of the way different birds of prey were used for falconry for different purposes. And, with H is for hawk, we got some of this about like which falcon was the best for which purpose and which station of life. And the Falcon Thief goes into a lot of that as well. But what this thing does in particular is it's not a personal autobiographical story. So there's not that level of bias. It's a journalist investigating and interviewing people around both of these individuals and, as best he could, the individuals themselves to try and get more information about it. And it just works incredibly well. And I remember when I was reading this, I read this just before the river trip that I did with my dad last year in 2025. And we were like, I had just finished it, so I was talking about it to dad, and it is just really cool because when we were on that river trip, we saw golden eagles, we saw bald eagles, we saw osprey, and those three are the only birds of prey that we saw, and we did hear an owl as well, but we only saw three. But to think that someone could be going into those areas, like we were just downstream of the Paw Paw Tunnel, and we were passing these people that were floating down the river in these inner tubes, and one of them who owned land right on the river said, that right up there, that's where the eagle's eyrie is. And these bald eagles made this giant nest in a tree on the tallest part of the ridge. Not the tallest tree around it. I think it was one of the tallest, but you could very clearly see this hundreds of feet below this nest. So there was a bit of personal feelings attached to it because this was something that I had just read in this book. This guy climbing up cliffs and trees across the world just to steal eggs. And, you know, it made it feel like I was more aware of what I was noticing. And this book, really fascinating. The detective McWilliams, it talks about how he had wanted to be a national level police officer but wasn't able to do that. He was able to do a city level police job, and so he spent time, he preferred being a beat cop because he liked being able to walk around and talk to people and know the faces of the people that he ostensibly protected. And at one point in time, he ended up sick for a while and recovering for longer, and he took up birding. Now, I've done birding before, and after hunters, the demographic of people that put the most money into public property west of the Mississippi are birders. And east of the Mississippi, back in 2011 when I heard this fact, birders had already surpassed hunters as the main source of income and revenue for public land because birders are often retirees. They're people that tend to have a lot of time and patience. And that sort of thing you don't get when you're young, not often at least. So most birders that I've met and that anyone I know that is into it have met, they tend to be older folk or very patient and meticulous younger folk. Because you have to be able to identify a species by minute details that you can only get from binoculars, magnified, really big, huge photo lenses for your photography. You get just the slightest bit of orange on a bird's head, and that's a young male. If it were an adult male, it would have more orange on its head, and if it were a younger male, not quite a yearling bird, it wouldn't have any orange on it. And there's all these minute differences. But because he had this hobby, and because other people in McWilliams' department knew he had this hobby, he ended up getting tasked with local cases about, someone having stuffed birds or eggs or that sort of thing. And as he did that, he ended up being referred higher and higher up the chain until eventually he was a national level expert on egg thieves and of bird thieves. And so he knew a lot of these names in the business, but he didn't know, he knew a lot of the names of prominent thieves, of the inspectors across the world. And so when he gets the description in this book, in that first chapter, when he gets that description of the person and the number and quality of the eggs, as he's driving, as he says in this book, he's thinking it can only be one of three people. And of those, the most likely is this person. I was more interested in the detective's story because his was very mundane and relatable. Whereas the egg thief had grown up in Africa, in colonial Africa, and had been a volunteer as a young man at a time when the park systems were really starting to get going in Eastern Africa, and doing research for he was volunteering doing research for different scientific groups, and then he turned to stealing those eggs because there was more money in selling usable eggs to collectors than there was in, volunteering or even going into sciences himself. But as it looks from this investigation that Joshua Hammer does, it's like he doesn't even necessarily care that the eggs were the main focus of his work, but that he got to be like a daredevil. And so he ended up making money, making friends, growing a business out of this, meeting a lot of people in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Qatar, and a lot of those wealthy Arabic individuals got into falconry because that's what wealthy people do traditionally. And so he's got this business growing, he's got friends, he's got loved ones, he's making a career out of it, and eventually he makes a mistake, he gets caught. It's a almost larger than life story though. And McWilliams' story is just so much more interesting in that regard because he came from a very ordinary background, and he only stumbled into his career because of a passion for birding, and that turning him into someone who ends up catching this big thief is really just interesting. And, like I said, I was on this river trip when I had just finished reading this, and I saw bald eagles really close, and I remember seeing one flying over a train track, and you could see the train a mile back coming around the river bend. And, the Potomac River is a very big river, very long stretches at times, and you could tell that train was coming downstream. That eagle was flying low, below the tree, like below the canopy level of the trees, along the same path and direction as the train was going. And I kept on thinking, you gotta climb, you gotta climb, you gotta climb. And it did, and it came back around, and it gave us a beautiful perspective of it. It was maybe 50 feet above the water, and it flew upstream as I pointed it out and saw it, and my dad saw it. It was magical. And so, like I said, I had this perspective when I was doing that trip because I was also, had just finished reading this book, and how there are these people that go and take eggs and sell it. Bald eagles and golden eagles, I don't think would have been in that market, but kind of related as well as more recently, I was going to a wolf sanctuary for work, and it turned out to be more of a wolf dog sanctuary. But what was fascinating about it was that they were talking about the different levels of the fur market in the United States and how regulated and unregulated that is. And, you know, I didn't put two and two together until pulling this book off the shelf, doing some skimming, and thinking about this rant. But this book covers a very similar subject matter to that, which is, you don't usually think about, or at least I don't usually think about, like, the markets for wolf fur, for eggshells, for for yearling falcons. I don't think about that. So, in the case of that wolf sanctuary, and in the case of this book, it opened my eyes to this cause. And in both cases, there's someone who is very passionate about outreach and education, and that's partly what caused this book to come about. So, it's just a really interesting opportunity. And in this case, I am holding on to the book because I purchased it for $7 and it was worth its $7. But more to the point, it is signed. I think by Joshua Hammer. It might have been signed by like a friend. There's a message here that says February 11th, 2020 for Allie and Mike. Hope you enjoy this. All the best. And then there's an autograph. I think this is a signed copy, signed by Joshua Hammer. I can't be certain, but I think that's what this is. And so I have a really cool copy of a book here and a really cool story within that I'm going to keep. It was worth my money, and if you see this on a bookshelf, I'd recommend picking it up, especially if you have ever enjoyed those stories I've presented on this Rant channel about specific people in the animal sciences world, wildlife management world, and specific animals. If that is the kind of thing you like, and you haven't read The Falcon Thief yet, this is a book to get, and I think you will find that your money is well spent on it. Yeah. My name's Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.